So yeah, we're here today to give you guys a few different ideas on what you can do with securing land and also with running more sustainably, leaving the matrix, but still as we're existing out or moving out of this three-dimensional world into the 5D, we still need money during that time, and then, as I said, moving into more bartering systems and things like that, having some skills you have, so you know you can collaborate with others and are desirable for community as well. So welcome guys. What were your names?
Hello, I'm Jen.
Hi Jen, nice to meet you.
I'm Kat.
Hi Kat. Okay, so we'll get started. Are we live streaming at the moment?
Yes, we're live.
Okay, hi Off Grid, Leaving the Matrix group. Welcome. We're having this little first gathering at Paradise Park in Brisbane, which is a beautiful gardens full of amazing food plants, and I was lucky enough last time I was here, was shown around by one of the guys who started it many years ago, and he showed me around and told me the stories of creating this spot, and yeah, it's a beautiful place to come and visit if you're ever in town. But we're here today to talk more about moving away from the matrix world, and we've had a few discussions already with the people who are attending, the wonderful souls who've come along, so thank you for coming along, and thank you for viewing online if you're online there. We've got a helicopter going over us at the moment, so I'll just be quiet for a second. Okay, so we might break this up into two sections, hey? And by the way, this is my partner Melissa, and Melissa runs a lot of workshops and events at festivals, and runs workshops with myself, our sound healing course, and we're very passionate about learning stuff first and foremost, always learning, and secondly, passing on what we learn. Okay, because there's an old saying, you never really know something until you teach it. You truly know it until you teach it. So anything you learn, I do encourage you to pass on to others. And I feel that's the journey of my life path anyway. And I know many of the people who are members of our group are very passionate about learning and then passing it on to whether it be their kids, their friends, their family, or others who are willing. But we're not here, are we, to, I think a lot of people have woken up to this fact, we're not here to change people's opinions who aren't ready. Because if they're on, I don't like to say lower or higher vibration, if they're on a different vibration to you, it can be fairly pointless trying to change their mind about something, because we all see different realities. So we're both right, you know what I mean? So yeah, I want to start out just letting you guys know that none of this is financial, commercial, or legal advice in any way, what we're going to talk about today. And these two subjects, the reason why we decided to have this at the first gathering is, as you might know, our group's grown quite exponentially to, I think we're nearing 38,000 members, many from Australia, but also many from other sides of the world. So, and every day I get messages or see comments on our off-grid group of people asking for different things and wanting to learn different skills. And one of the main thing also, I used to run a van life workshop, and one subject that got asked a lot was, how do I live free on the road outside the matrix, because I still need money, and how do you do it, Robbie, because you're not on the dole and I haven't been for many years, and and then they say to me, but I've got kids to support. Well, I have 3 children myself and 2 still going to school, and I just found a way that I could still help support them, help them, their mum with things, and still be able to thrive without the need of a job or government support in what I call more, for lack of a better word, more entrepreneurial ways. Okay, so hopefully in our second session I can give you guys tips and strategies on that, or you might have a light bulb moment I'll be happy if you at least have one light bulb moment where you can take away something and implement it in your own lives. So that's one reason we're here for. That'll be our second session. So our first session we're going to start on is a lot of people I've noticed in the group and messages as well have been interested in getting off grid, obviously because it's the name of the group. A lot don't know how they can save huge deposits for parcels of land, don't know how they can collaborate with others yet. Their friends group might not be, you know, as we're growing and evolving, we often move away from what our friends and family are doing, don't we? So it's about finding new tribe who are on the same level. It's about finding what I call synergistic collaborations. Okay? And yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, how do I save up even 50 grand for a small house deposit, let alone if I want to get on a big acreage, you know, I might need maybe 100 grand or more as a deposit, and then I have to get a bank loan, and that's the old world way of thinking. So I'm here to hopefully pass on a bit of my experience. So my background is back in early 2000s, yeah, 2002, I realised I was working as a wards person at the Royal Children's Hospital, and I love being around the kids, and many of the sickest kids are old souls, if you know what I mean, and taught me a lot of stuff just before they passed over. And I'm a Life Path 11, so I get a lot of messages from the other side, so I listen to them. And one thing that came to me, a strong message, was I'm not meant to stay here. It's something I'm meant to do. As you know, we go through a lot of things in life, don't we? And we wonder, why did we do that? And then we realize later in life it's all for a reason, to learn different skills and things. And so I wanted to kind of, back then I thought, I want to get ahead and create, at that time, back then, I was thinking a different mindset, create wealth so it's more sustainable. I got a strong message something was going to happen. Now it's shifted away from that, but I realized I did this for a reason. I was like, how can I go to these personal development seminars or property seminars on how they buy property, no money down, when they're thousands of dollars to go to these events back then, and they were all the rage, right? You'd have a free event with an upsell to something really expensive, but they'd leave you thinking you don't know anything until you go to the really expensive event. And then I was reading in a book about property renovation, and I was reading some books that I'd bought. And then I read in one book, and I forget even what book it was. The library's full of books and they're all free, you know, of all the knowledge you could ever want. Now, I'm a strong agreeer in this book burnings now, so a lot of the knowledge has been forgotten or has to be re-remembered. Welcome. Come and grab a seat. We've started already, but you're welcome to join us. Yeah. So, yeah, one thing I learned was the library was full of books. They're all free. So I developed this voracious tendency to get so many books that I couldn't read them all, so I'd get lay fees and all that thing, and then I have to keep re-borrowing them. And some of the great books, even written at the turn of the century, or not this century, but the last century, some of the greatest books I read, which really gave me ideas on how to negotiate with people, how to build synergistic collaborations, you know. Those books I read 3 or 4 times, and up to 9 times. Some books I read up to 9 times because they were written in old speak of English, and I started an addiction kind of and that helped me off negative addictions, was like smoking cigarettes. I'd start a chapter and keep reading, and some of the stuff I learnt was personal development stuff, which helped lift me and my confidence in myself to be able to achieve things. And the other stuff was, I wanted to get into property. I felt a big calling about that, learn renovation, learn how to buy property, no money down. So there was a lot of books from America, but nothing from Australia, how they bought properties, no money down. And what I did is I just shifted their ideas into, how can I do this in Australia? Because they were talking about other things, you know, like they were talking about buying off veterans affairs and things like that, and stuff like that, like properties. that don't relate so much to Australia, but the essential idea of it really blew me away. How can I control property of my own and not have to save a big deposit? Because back then I was working at the Royal Children's Hospital. I was only on $28,000 a year before tax, right? So I started out then, and what I did is I negotiated ways with sometimes the vendor, which is the seller of the property, sometimes even with the real estate agent. And a few times it was with the real estate agent. They look at me initially like I'm mad when I say I want this property, but I'm going to put $100 down, and that's borrowed off my credit card, right, as a deposit, and secure that property. But more often than not, I achieved that goal. So in the end, while I was still working at the hospital, I bought a few properties that way. And what I did is I convinced the bank to lend me 110% of the deposit. Normally 105 to 110% of the full balance, sorry, not the deposit. And they'd agree. So what I do with that extra 5 to 10% is I'd renovate the property and add value to it. So now I'm not saying that this model is the way to go. I'm going to show you a few models that I learned along the way and evolved into. But that was one strategy I did, and it worked quite well for me back then. It worked so well that I ended up having 1.75 million in property loans, and properties worth, you know, at one stage close to $3 million. So I'd added that extra value on top of the loans. But then the market fell, right? And my marriage broke up because I was very focused on, back then, property, and also I ran the Gold Coast Business Club. It had 3,500 members there. We used to have events, and I was also teaching people how to build websites. So I moved away from working at the hospital. I remember when I left the hospital, people said, "What are you doing? You've got a job for life here." And I said, well, I've been here 8 years. I've learned what I needed to learn. I feel like it's a jail cell if I stay in for life, you know. And funny thing, the people who said I've got a job for life, a few years later they all got redundancies anyway, and that hospital's now closed, right? It's now doesn't even exist. So yeah, nothing's forever, is it? And that's another lesson I've learnt into property. You know, we all imagine that we're going to buy this dream property or secure this dream property somehow, and it's going to be forever. But nothing in this life is forever. There's constant lessons, and there's constant barriers and falling down and getting up. And we chose to be here, didn't we? We chose to live this existence and learn these lessons to move forward. So remember that, we chose that. So in the end, we sold all our properties, but we didn't owe anything, and we'd lived quite well off that way of living. Now, I'm not recommending people do this, but back then the strategy I learned was to live off the equity of the properties. So I lived quite an extravagant lifestyle back then in the Gold Coast. So we were going to smorgasbords on the water, you know, every second night and things like that, and I was able to do that through. G'day guys. Come and have a seat. Yeah. So we started on the property area of what's going on, and I started to live off the equity. So what happened is each time I'd renovate a property, I'd buy it, remember, no money down. If it was a deposit, I'd try and put down $100 off my credit card, and the way I'd get the seller, or in often cases you'd have to convince the real estate agent first, because he's the stumbling block, or she's the stumbling block, because you're dealing with them first showing you the home, and they're worried about their commission, aren't they? Or if he's putting $100 down and he doesn't settle, I don't get my commission, and this property's being tied up. So a few books I read. Who's read How to Win Friends and Influence People? Yeah, Napoleon Hill stuff. Who's read? Yeah, Law of Success in 16 Lessons was like 2 books, 1,400 pages long, and then that was written in 1928, and then Think and Grow Rich was written in the 1932, I think it was. And yeah, I read that 9 times because I really wanted to get this stuff. It was kind of written more in a bit old speak, so I really wanted to understand this. And at the start of the book, he says, read it 3 times. I thought, I want to get this, so I read it 9 times. And I learned some crazy things out of that book. Some concepts that you can transfer into any part of your life. One is, out of those combined books, one is Tonality of Voice. So using your tonality, people listen to how you speak rather than what you actually even say. And there's been tests done on this that you can look at, people absolutely speaking gibberish and actually selling their idea to people just through, through tonality. And saying stuff that doesn't even make any sense. So tonality is a major thing, but it's not about controlling someone else. It's about building rapport with others. So if you can build rapport well with others, and especially if you can give them what they want, in return you'll get what you want. You get it? Okay, so the focus of mine was how would I convince them to take that $100 deposit? Well, I might be offering, if I've studied my area well, and back then it was, now remember we're going to shift more into the off-grid area, but I'm going to give you some concepts that can, if you can do them in suburbia with high-priced areas that are going up, imagine how well these concepts could relate to off-grid areas that maybe not many people are actually buying in yet, because there's a lot of space in Queensland that isn't of such value as, these markets here and up to Sunshine Coast have gone up dramatically, but there's a ripple effect that happens. Who's heard of the ripple effect? Yeah, so what the ripple effect means is I found suburbs that back in the boom of 2002, which was a massive boom, in Brisbane, properties doubled. But where I was buying in Logan, properties tripled, right? Because there was a lower buy-in price. So first price house and land I bought in Logan was $82,000. Okay, and that ended up tripling within a few months, even. And a few properties out there tripled in value. So you imagine the equity. I was holding them, so I was renting them out to, because back then we talked about not destroying the golden goose that lays the eggs, by selling and just realizing the profit, just keeping the equity so I could buy more property and living off the equity. So when I mean living off the equity, the bank would revalue it, and then I was able to borrow more money off that at really low, I'd secure low interest rates, and I'd live off that equity knowing that I had the skills to add value to properties, but also I learned the skills to choose properties that would go up. So that ripple effect would start, say, one example, in Coorparoo, I saw they were suddenly all renovating in Coorparoo at the second boom of, I think it was around 2008. So there was a boom 2002, then there was another thing happen a bit later. No, there was a recession in 2008, later on, so we're talking, I think it was about 2012, yeah, about 2012. So in Coorparoo, I saw that they were renovating all these properties, and it's easy to see because tradies vehicles everywhere. Have you seen them in suburbs near you? Suddenly all these tradie vehicles, they're raising houses. If they're raising houses, they're spending lots and lots of money there, so the property prices are going up. There's obviously savvy investors getting in on there. Now, there's an old saying I learned, if you see a bandwagon, you're too late. So there's no way I'm going to buy in Coorparoo, am I? I'm going to follow the ripple. So the next suburb out was Camp Hill. Not much was happening in Camp Hill. See a few tradies starting to renovate, but I was with them one of the first. So then I see this property, and it's the funny story. This old lady, as I'm renovating after we purchased it, and I'm out there painting it, this old lady from around the corner came past. She's smiling at me, and I went down to have a break and have a chat to her over the fence. She said, "It's so good seeing someone finally renovating the ugly, we call it the ugly brown house on the hill." And when I saw it, I saw potential, right? I saw it's on Old Cleveland Road, so there's potential for a business there. So I thought I could add value by putting a business in there, and I ended up putting my accountant rented off me because he was telling me he was renting at Bulimba for $600 a week, a whole house, and I said, and this house I bought was currently renting when I bought it, and they were moving out for like 200 and something a week back then, right? So I thought if I could put my accountant in there, he'll get a reduction in rent, but I could still double the rent that's happening there, and he'll save a few hundred on what he's paying in Bulimba. Plus he's got this exposure of main road street frontage. Now this has something to do with off-grid living in the fact that this is an example of pushing the limits, right? So if you could relate this to doing your tiny houses or your... And remember, this isn't advice in any way for commercial or legal or financial. It's just something I did. Okay, so what I did is I put him in there, and my accountant, when he saw it, he loved it. He's like, I could put a big sign. He put an oversized sign that wasn't really even legal there either out the front, because tens of thousands of cars go up Old Cleveland Road every day. He could see this accountant's sign, so he increased his business, and I renovated. I did all the work myself, and ended up that he was worried that what happens if council comes and says something. So if you can relate this to your tiny houses and things. So I asked a brother-in-law at the time who was on council. He was on council development. He's like, no, I wouldn't do it, Robbie. I wouldn't do it. I said, well, what's the worst case scenario? And he goes, they'll tell you can't do it and you have to stop. And I said, that's the worst case scenario? So what I did is I said to my accountant, okay, how about we write into your rental contract that if anything like this happens for any reason, you have an out, you can end your lease. He was happy, he moved in. And one thing I found, if people have outs, they don't want them. Yeah. Have you ever been secured into something and all you can think about is how I can get out of it? But if someone has complete freedom, they want to stay, right? So it was, thinking that mentality of you don't have to hold people into things. And anyway, after a while, he's running his business and he's growing his business because of the street frontage and everything. And council ended up walking in. So you imagine that in relation to an off-grid property if you're doing tiny houses or whatever. And he rang me up all worried that day. He's like, Robbie, they came through and I had to show them no one's living here and we're using it for commercial premises. They saw all the desks and they walked through and took down notes and photos. And I said, it's all cool, mate. Don't worry about it. I had this feeling. And then anyway, within a few weeks, I get this letter in the mail. We inspected your property and we noticed that there's a commercial business running there. It's now zoned shops and offices. So I didn't have to put in a development application. I didn't have to pay any money. The rates billed only went up a small amount, but the value of the property went up hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was resold to the person who bought that business, for hundreds of thousands more than what we had purchased it for. And even when you take into consideration, I did all the renovation, which I remember the guy who walked on it said, well, it looks like you've spent about 100 grand here. And because I'd done all the work myself, it was only like around 30, I think, just over 30. And I'm standing there going, yeah, I think it was about that much, and he added that to the value even before we got the tenant in, and then it went up even more dramatically. But that ripple effect happened also, so the properties went up. While I'm talking to this old lady as I'm renovating it, getting back to that thing over the fence, she mentions to me around the corner she's got a property that she wants to sell. And this is a beautiful old Queenslander. And we have a cup of tea, and then remember how I talked about building rapport, and you can transfer this quite easily into off-grid properties, because to do it in the city, especially, she knew it was going to boom. I told her, I was completely honest to her. I said, look, I'd love to buy this property now and buy it off you at a 6-month settlement. And I told her exactly what I want after listening to what she wanted, obviously, first. Her big concerns were she was moving into a retirement home. She wanted to know it was sold to, and her biggest concern was someone she likes. Whether you or I, all people have different ways of thinking, don't they? So her main thing was someone she likes, and her biggest one was she showed me the grave of her animals out the back, and she said, I don't want the person who buys it to disturb that grave, because she'd lived there so long. I had her dogs in it and a few other animals that she'd had along the way. And I said, well, you know, I do up properties to renovate, and then might sell shortly after. And she said, that's not my concern. It's my concern that the person who buys it respects that and doesn't disturb it. Okay, so I agreed to that, and I realised that she doesn't need to move into her home for about 6 months. It was being built for her retirement home. So she just wanted to know it was sold to someone she got along with. So that was the tea time is the most important time when you're sitting there building that rapport with someone. So by the end of it, I'd agreed to what she wanted. Then I told her exactly what I wanted without lying. I said, look, I would like to put a small deposit on this property, and I would like a 6-month settlement. And I believe that in 6 months the property price will rise, and I am thinking of selling it then, doing a quick reno and then selling it. And I'd agreed not to. And when I did sell it, by the way, I passed on to the new owners, this is what the previous owner would like, especially with her graves. She would like them to be kept intact. And so in the end, that ripple effect happened. So you understand the ripple effect? One area goes up, the next one it just ripples out normally in a circle too, from the city usually, right? And that's what happened, the same thing in 2002. Brisbane boomed, prices doubled. Then I bought in Logan, my first few houses, renovated them, and they tripled in value. So, you know, sometimes Hey, Mickey.
Hey, how you going? Sorry, mate.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So we're talking about property at the moment, how to secure property, and I've been through a few. One way that I bought properties no money down in city, and that you can transfer these sort of skills to rural properties probably easier, because city is so sought after, and you know, there's going to be a lot more offers often on city properties than there are on certain rural properties. Now, that's one example, is you know, learning the skills to negotiate so that you can either put no money down or a very small deposit. As I said, some of the properties, $100 borrowed off my credit card. Other properties, maybe as I was doing more properties, it might have been $2,000, but that was equity from properties that I've raised the value of, and banks were giving me that. Now, back then, that's what we were taught, and a lot of the big spruikers were charging tens of thousands of dollars to teach people that negotiation skill, but they were also teaching you to live off equity, which it was sustainable for me back then, because I knew I could keep adding value. Rents were going up. Because I did everything myself, the negative were occasionally I was renting properties. Occasionally I'd get the wrong people into properties and I'd have to remove them, but the same way I got them, you know, if they weren't paying the rent or if they were causing trouble in the street, I'd just go along in my, you know, my old painter's clothes and say, look guys, let's have a sit down. If you don't pay the rent, I don't pay the mortgage, we both lose. And often they'd say to me, okay, we'll move out today, you know, and then I'd have the property again to re-rent out. But sometimes tenants would trash the properties, and I just painted a property after repaint it. And also the bank loans. I had 1.75 million in loans, and I had no job. Like, I'd left the hospital, and when I wanted more properties, the banks would say to me things like, you're too rent reliant. And here I'm thinking, one I learnt from some guys I looked up to, the Reno Kings, and who ended up interviewing me actually for Australian Property Investor in 2008. So I got to know these guys. They'd say back to the bank manager, he'd say, you're too rent reliant. I'd say, you're too job reliant, you know. Yeah. Bank managers, you know, their job could be taken any time, but my tenants leave, I can find more tenants, can't I? But I had 1.75 million in loan. Every night I had to learn to, it was a lot of personal development work to think, I got all these loans and I got to go to sleep tonight. And it wasn't just personal development work, I was drinking myself to sleep each night, ended up, ruining my marriage in a lot of ways, and other things, my relationship with my kids could have been way better if I wasn't drinking. And now, thankfully, it is. I haven't drunk for years now, so I'm very happy. But that was the old world way of doing. But I wanted to give you that example so you can realise there's certain things you can take from there, isn't there? The negotiation skills, the listening to what someone else wants who might have a property and finding ways to achieve their problem. And then by default, you always get what you're after that way. And that's the biggest way to build rapport. The tonality. I learned to use tonality. Yes, this question.
Do you not think people are too greedy nowadays, though, to do those kind of deals like it was years ago? I think people are just always about the money and all the money can I get. I wouldn't do a 6-month deal, I just want to get the cash now. I just feel like that's how it is now.
You've got to find
Melissa can speak into that.
There are some people who are really motivated. Same with businesses, flipping businesses. There are some people who just want out. And it's either close the business and get out. People going into nursing homes, a lot of them want out fast too.
Okay, I'll say the question first for people online. So the question is, do you think people are a bit more greedy these days and wouldn't agree to those sort of conditions like long settlement and low deposits?
Yeah, so I guess sometimes it comes down to the embodiment of like, what are you embodying when you're coming up with these supposed problems? Does that make sense? So like, if you're embodying more of the kind of energy of, okay, well, this is what I desire, and if they're not really willing to negotiate, then maybe that's not a relationship that you actually want to form anyway. So maybe it might mean that door is kind of closing because there could be another door around. So yeah, sometimes it's sort of sitting with, okay, well, being really sort of strong in what it is that what you're desiring, and if that's not being met, that could be a signal that that's actually not a door that you need to open because there's another one around the corner. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
And with you being in property for so long, do you think the forecast right now is that there's going to be another crash? Like when there's been a boom, there's a crash. Can you see that coming too?
Okay, the question was, being in property so long, do I foresee a crash coming or what's happening? Now, I've been out of property for a long time now, so which we're coming to. I've left that wanting to control ownership of property, which I'm leading to. There's new ways of collaborations now that we're using, but Melissa would be the best one to answer that because she's a lawyer in property settlements, so she sees it all the time. Would you like to answer that, or would you like me to? Okay.
It's kind of a...
It is a crystal ball question.
Yeah. And like, there's lots of timelines, and people were sitting in different places. Like, if you want to look at something like that, you can look at things like astronomy and things like that. There's often a lot of cycles that happen, and you'll notice that. So if you know anyone that's well rehearsed in that sort of stuff to do with planets and things, that can have a lot to play with.
I'd like to see a crash so I can buy this.
Yeah. Again, it's watching the ripple. So areas like, who's looking Sunshine Coast? Anyone? Okay, so near Noosa, the bandwagon's already here. When you see a bandwagon, it's already gone. Like properties in Noosa, 47% rise already this year. That's a massive increase. They might go up more, but are you going to keep getting priced out that way? And how many, like some of the properties I did buy, there was one in particular at Logan Lee, when Logan Lee was the last of the 2002 great boom ripple suburbs. No one kind of wanted to live in Logan Lee because it was fairly rough. No one is fairly rough. In fact, someone got killed with a steel pipe, I think, in my street when I bought that property. There was gangs and things like that, and drug dealers. But I saw potential with that area because there's a train station and there's a hospital. You could see the hospital from the backyard of this large property I bought. And in fact, I ended up purchasing that property for $97,000 and selling it for $427,000. That was years later, though. So, but you think of that increase, 97 to 427,000. The ripple was happening there, right? And when I got there, because it was the last suburb, there was 21 offers. There was like 50 odd people there at the inspection I went to, and there was many inspections. And there was 21 offers. How did I get it? I offered a small deposit, but I offered extra money to what they were asking. So they were asking, like, I think it was, from memory, around 83,000, and I ended up offering, no, it must have been more than that. I ended up offering 11,000 more than they were asking. So I think in the end it was 97. So yeah, it was 86 they were asking, and I ended up offering 97. Now I don't know if those other 21 offers, if anyone came near me, but I knew that if I offered 11 grand more from the Ripple, I knew property prices in Brisbane had doubled. So, and it ended up, it tripled overnight there, and then even more so when I'd sold. So it was a good thing that I'd offered more. And to me, it wasn't like to me it was all just zeros. It was the way I'd learn is you borrow money, the equity goes up. It wasn't like hard-earned cash to me. It was just bank prints money, and I convinced them to give it to me, right? But as I'm getting to the big thing was getting to sleep at night with so much loans, even though my equity was going up more than the loans. Then I was pulling out, because renovating and negotiating properties was kind of like a full-time thing, managing properties. At one stage I had 10 properties, you know, so dealing with 10 tenants and some of them trashing properties and things like that. Having all those rates bills come in at once. So they were Brisbane and Gold Coast. So Gold Coast was 6 monthly, Brisbane was 3 monthly, isn't it? Yeah, rates. So I'd get all, you know, all these rates bills at once, and all my friends and used to think, oh, Robbie's so successful, he's got all these properties, and he's been in Australia, featured in Australian Property Investor magazine in 2008 and things like that, and he speaks about property and stuff. He must be doing so well. And then I'd be looking at them, and they'd be going overseas, and I'm worried about how to come up with all these rates bills. So never got to go overseas in those times in my 20s and 30s that all my friends did. Yeah.
It's good to also notice that we're potentially going through a transition with the money system at the moment. So what that will look like in the future, I can't foretell. But we are going through a transition. That's why we've got the things like cryptocurrency and stuff. And that may not necessarily be the currency of the future, but it is a transitionary period that we're going through, and how that will affect the property market or land, we can't really be sure. But there's definitely, we're going through a transition at the moment, and I don't know how long that will go for. You'll see obviously a lot of banks talking about like a pushback with the crypto and saying it's not worth anything and all of that. So
yeah, but it will end up going into that way. And if you want to talk to someone about crypto, Emma's your lady for that. She's already doing stuff with crypto and in off-grid deals as well. So Emma's one of our Teachers of Light, which is our founding members of the off-grid group. And Emma's also going to be doing some talks later on about off-grid building, because she's been involved in earthships and aircrete as well. Yeah, the domes. So yeah, they're going to be some great workshops that we'll have coming up. Yeah, we'll move into community as Melissa suggested. So now that's an idea. Just capping up on that is that's how I bought, you know, millions in property, no money down. But the overwhelm was the debt, living with the debt, going to sleep at night. You know, often I'd close my eyes and there'd be, oh, I don't have a job. How do I pay all this? You know, but I always found a way. There's a secret I learned. You burn bridges, no retreat, no surrender. There's always, the universe will collaborate for you. Okay, and there's many great stories from the past of that happening. So one thing I found is if I made it a must, that's why I always cringe when people talk my side hustle. I'm like, side hustle will never be, you know, it's got to be your all, right? If you got a backup plan, you'll always be living that way. But if you make it a must, that's how you make things happen, whether it's booking out workshops, whether it's doing your passion. You know, for me, it became music for many years, playing town to town and living off my music. I made myself a promise back in 2005 when I left the hospital and I had already over $1 million in loans. I made myself one promise that I will never work a job again, just over J-O-B, just over broke, right? I will never, now I don't judge people on this because I know there's plenty of single mums and families that need it. No, I don't mean the job, but the government support. Yeah, government support. It's obviously a lot of people love their job, and I'm not judging. This was a agreement for myself only. Remember, this is just what I did was I wanted to give my all to my passions. So I made myself 2 promises: not to have a job ever again since 2005, and not to ever sign up for government support after that time. And I haven't. And anytime my kids need something, like my daughter needs, my son needs a new laptop from schools, because his parents here, stuff has gotten real expensive, hasn't it? Back when I went to school, like Converse All-Stars were like $15, right? Now it's the Nikes for $250, or it's the laptop for $1.5 grand, or it's the clarinet recently for $600. When I was living busking, I always found a way, whatever it is your passion. I just did extra hours out busking, and I was able to pay cash for these things. But it's a matter of giving it your all, those things. So now, moving on to community. Now remember, there's some ideas from that past that you can use in towards community. And so hopefully I've given you some ideas that you don't need to come up with a big deposit. It's more about finding the right people who want to collaborate. Now, one thing I've found since, especially the off-grid group, starting that less than a year, just over a year ago now we've got 38,000 members. And welcome to people online if you're new, and if you've been here for a while, thanks for interacting on the group. It's so good to see how it's going. There's many people in our circles that we don't realise, and in our group, that are also landowners of large parcels of beautiful blocks of land. Now, you or I who don't have land at the moment might think, oh wow, they're in such a special spot. But what often I found some of them are thinking is, I wish I had more of my own tribe here. Now, especially with what's happening in the world, and this relates back to, the question about if people are greedy, in this common time. What I found with landowners is they're suddenly also realizing, hey, I can't do this all on my own. I need synergistic collaborations. I need people with skills. So to make yourself that valuable, and remember, ownership of property isn't forever, right? And if anyone, I used to say when I used to talk about buying real estate in the 3D world more, if you think your own, it's like who owns their land, right? Outright, and a few hands are put up, and I say, well, if you think you own your land outright, try finding gold or have a road want to come through, like we had in a case in a Surfers Paradise property. The council will take it off you, so you don't really technically own it. If you think you own your land, try stop paying your rates bills and see how long it is before there's a possession going. Welcome, guys. And so moving that into areas of collaboration, there is landowners at the moment who, and plenty of them, are paying high rates bills. They might be just them living. There's people who are aging or might have families who are thinking, okay, what's coming? They might be seeing that what we've been talking about before when everyone arrived, Nick mentioned. You've got to be prepared for this stuff. So I've met quite a few landowners with large blocks of land that we've started collaborating with that might have hundreds of acres or more, right? And they're saying to me, look, we realise we need to build a small community, but of the right people with skills. So a few have come to me and said, Rob, how do we build these communities here, and have liked the ideas that I've brought to them about not only building a community, but a mystery school where we could teach things like each of our members have skills, like Emma can teach Earthcrete and the Aircrete and Earthships. I mixed them two together. Melissa runs workshops and has that skill of running workshops at big events. Ways to make their properties more sustainable. So if you think outside the box that way. What can I give? And some people might be thinking, well, I don't have a lot of skills. That's what we're here for, is to teach each other skills, aren't we? That's why we got together in this group online, and the people who are here today, is that we can share each other's skills and add more strings to our bows. So if you see a landowner who might be, I've met a few landowners who are either aging and they're suddenly realizing, oh, I don't want to be alone if something happens to me on this property. I'd like some people around me who have skills that can help. Then, as I said, families who are like, we want to be more sustainable. We want to be able to create, while we're moving from that 3D world to 5D, we still need money, don't we? We still need to support things and be able to buy things. How on this land, because I've got so much of it, how can I create more things out of it? Help in the gardens, have a market stall, have workshops and events. Yeah, giving back to the land as well. And often when I walk these properties, and I'm invited to them now from these landowners that are often members of our group, and I'll realise that they were given, the land chose them. Do you know what I mean? The land actually, I get this strong sense that the land chose them. And I've heard a few stories about before, I won't go into too much detail because it's for the private landowners to tell, but before them, the wrong people owned the land, and then suddenly, mysteriously, they got these amazing parcels of land in dream locations. You wouldn't believe some of the ones I've walked recently, with so much going for them. And suddenly, that person with the kind of the wrong intentions has suddenly been, I feel like it's kind of, the land has forced them out and then chosen the right owner. And that's where, you know, we're coming into that mix of metaphysical meets, you know, the business world now. And, you know, and the ancients used to mix science with magic, with music, didn't they? You know, that's how they had their great advancements. If anyone's looked into Tartaria civilizations that have been hidden, and Egypt-style technologies, right? And all the great Sumerian, you know, could do things that we can't even do now. And that was that mixture. And then when we mix that in what we're doing, you know, even with collaborations, that's when the true magic happens. So never underestimate that power of putting out to others and to the universe of what you want to create, and focus on what you want. If it's hundreds of acres to live with your tribe, that is entirely possible, isn't it? Welcome.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
And yeah, so there's so many ways that we can find these things, and the words I love to use is synergistic collaborations now. So rather than try and do it all myself, I used to be, yeah, I'll do everything myself. No one, you know, even back then, even though I did all the renovations myself, it came from a place of, I don't trust anyone, and that tradie's going to rip me off and things like that. But now I've realised there's people with skills that I don't have, and 1 + 1 = 11, if you know what I mean. Okay, 1 + 1, there's not only these two different lifetime skill sets, but there's a third entity that comes into play. Magic, especially when you get into groups, and this is one thing I learned from old groups, old books like Napoleon Hill from, you know, the early 1900s, was that mastermind team. And he used to say, you know, often between, you know, 7 and 9 people get together, and then real magic happens. Okay, so that's why we've started to build our foundation team for the group, and we've got some amazing members come on, like Emma, who have you know, Emma's helped build earthships, and done Domecrete workshops, and, you know, can contribute those sort of skills. Whereas, you know, Melissa's got that, you know, settlement law side of things, plus run workshops.
Well, interpersonal skills are really important.
Interpersonal
too.
skills, yeah.
So
yeah.
interpersonal skills, definitely probably one of the most important things when you're creating community. Like, that's the two main things that we see that community struggle is like finances, you know, income, money, and interpersonal skills. And I guess the best place to start with the interpersonal skills is yourself, and getting to know who you are and what are your triggers and what do I need to work on, and accepting, you know, there's going to be things about you that maybe you don't like, but how do you work with that, and how do you work well with others, and what other people do you work well with? So that's also a really important thing to look at, is those interpersonal skills, for sure.
Yeah. And each of us here today, or if you're listening online on the live for the Off-Grid group, you have things to offer, and maybe you're unsure of those things, but I'm sure you're coming into those things, or you wouldn't be here listening today or involved with what we're doing. So, and yeah, collaborating together, there's so much that can happen. So it's not just about, a lot of people I've seen talking on the Off-Grid group, boasting, oh yeah, I need each person to have $200,000. Have you seen those sort of posts? Yeah, and I've had to delete a few of them because some of them could be scams, right? And some of them I looked into. You might have heard of a recent one in northern New South Wales. I won't name the area or the people who were involved. But they raised all this money, and then the money went missing, didn't it? You know, so it's not necessarily, it's about trusting your instincts, not, you know, sorry?
Discernment.
Yeah, using your discernment. Yeah. Since when have your instincts ever been wrong? You know, people need to learn to trust their heart feeling. Like, head is generally wrong when you go with the head, but when you learn to listen to your heart, and people who do a lot of meditation are very in touch with their heart, and they vouch for that one, that, you know, once you get in touch with it really well, you might have had situations, like I remember one time I swerved, and the person next to me goes, why did you swerve? And then suddenly this car came at us, right, and completely missed us, right? When you feel those things, you know, it's an advanced warning of things. I'm not saying be totally negative and wary of everything. I'm saying just use your discernment and understand that you don't necessarily need hundreds of thousands of dollars to get involved in something. There are landowners out there who desire people they get along with, who they feel a tribe, who desire people who are willing to get their hands dirty, who are willing to contribute. So there's many cases I've seen within our group of landowners saying, look, I just need some people to pull out weeds and start the gardens, get going. But then other people are like, oh, I'd do that, except what says that you're not going to kick me out after a week? Well, there's no guarantees in life, is there? What says that they're not in that week going to have an amazing experience or learn something that they need to learn about life, you know?
It's also changing your mindset around ownership to custodianship as well when it comes to land. That's really important to remember.
Yeah, and custodianship is a really big one. So, hey Danielle. And custodianship is a really big one to have on board with things happening now. So land is being taken back by large chunks of our original people, isn't it? You know, the elders are starting to you know, I heard recently that a whole section of inside Australia was taken back as their own country now, you know, which was, I forget the size, but I remember it was enormous. And how can we help them? You know, because there's one thing I've learnt by elders who I've had relationships with, in especially northern New South Wales, is they have a word called Wirichin. Who's heard that word? Wirichin? Means, it means black fella, white fella dreaming together. Or, it means us collaborating and moving forward past what's happened. And there's so many ways that we can help each other and stand up for each other. But a big thing about this group that we created, and when I say we created, you guys, you know, like I just set up the group, and I got a strong message not to invite any friends a year ago. And then I remember at one stage I said, at one stage it started 1,000 people a week were joining, and then it was like at one stage in the Hyatt it was 1,000 a day were joining, more than 1,000 people a day, and now we're at like 38,000 people. You guys, we created this group together, and I wanted to use that, that theory that like the Wiritjin methodology plus the let's only focus on the positive. So you'll find a lot of people say, why was my post taken down? Well, if it has words like jibby jab and and navi vase and things like that, I won't say the full words because we're probably, Maxine, if it has those things.
And if you want to do that, that's absolutely up to you. But keep those politics off platforms like Facebook.
Yeah, we want to focus on what we can create, because one thing if anything I've learned on my journey through life, and I know a lot of you understand this, is where your focus goes, it grows. Okay, so what we're focusing on, if we're focusing on the negative and what's happening in the world right now, we're giving more power to it. And we were watching Initiation last night on Gaia, and it's just confirmed that so much. It's like you create the reality around you, you create this planet. Okay, so and I turned to you and I said, so we created this, let's create something amazing, like why not create our dream existence, our utopia or our Agartha or our Shambhala, whatever word you want to use. And that's why I called our founders team the Teachers of Light, because the Teachers of Light are the Agarthans that hold the knowledge. And I'm not saying our members hold the knowledge, but we're learners and we're rememberers. And that's the most important thing. I never say I'm an expert in anything. I'm always learning and learning and learning through this life, and remembering as well from other planes, other existences. And that's what I really believe this life is for, us to get together, collaborate, learn from each other. So that's the way moving forward, I think, rather than getting big loans. Like, if I learn anything from getting millions in loans is you don't need to. There's plenty of people out there with land who are looking for their tribe, looking for skills to add to it. So at that, I think we'll end this. Oh, you got something?
Yeah, but if you do want to invest some money together with a group, start it from fresh. Like, there's multiple different structures and entities and things that you can set up to do that, and that can be quite costly, and it can be quite time consuming and things like that as well. But there's lots of different ways you can hold land together and collaboration.
What's a good resource you'd recommend, because you have background in it? Like, how do you actually make an agreement with a bunch of people safely?
Usually you do have to get a lawyer to do it, and usually they're not very keen to get involved because there's multiple parties involved. Yeah, I just had a friend recently reach out to me, and it can be quite difficult in that sense to find someone that'll do it. Yes?
So would you be better off to have someone who owns the property and other people have long-term leases or something?
That's a potential option. Yeah, so there's the lease option. There's obviously, there's things like tenants in common. We're talking about Australian human created law here. There's things like trusts, companies, foundations, there's body corporates. There's lots of different ways of doing things. And and unfortunately, with the way that the human created law is, it often sits in the vibration of fear. So it can obviously bring in sometimes things into the community around, okay, well, what do we do if this happens and that happens? And it's often this kind of prevention sort of methods. So that is often a route that sometimes you have to take.
Yes.
With creating agreements, especially when you're getting a lawyer involved. Yeah.
Great. And that was a good question, because there's one thing I forgot to touch on is option contracts. Who's heard of option contracts? Anyone? So they're often called put-call options. So they have been used in shares, but also in property. And it's it's a strategy that a lot of property people used to teach at the big seminars and things like that. And it's a strategy used by builders to control a lot of, or developers to control a lot of property with little money down or no bank loans. So if you do still want to have technically a little bit of control over a property, but don't want to have a bank loan and don't want to have to settle on the property, an option can be a good way of doing this. So an option contract gets done up by a solicitor, and it's basically an option, if I could describe it, it's a piece of paper that when agreed to by the vendor, so the seller of the property, so you have to have a seller who might want to sell their property but might not want the full amount of cash right up for the property. They might just be behind in their rates bills, or just need an income coming in and they don't have a way to do that for their property. So it's a way of helping them by saying, look, I'd like to put an option on your contract on your property. So the option is normally written in a way that, say you're the seller and I'm the buyer. It gives me the right to buy that property at one day for an already agreed price in that contract, but it also gives me the right to not buy it. But in that time of the contract, so you'd set a date, for the exercising of the option. It could be years away, right? And the date of the exercise of the contract, you either could create a new contract, or you could just give the land back, or you could settle on that property, right? What it gives builders and property developers is a way to control a property while the price is going up, and then when they exercise the option, it's worth more, or some of them actually sell the option on to other developers. But it gives you a little bit of a sense of control of the property, because the time of that option, you have written into that contract things like, I'm allowed to do adjustments to the property. So it's kind of like, almost like you're renting it, but you have control of it. So in the option, there might be, to sweeten it for the seller, might be that you're giving them an option fee every week or every month. Okay, so if you got together with a bunch of people, you could agree to this large parcel of land, maybe giving them a bunch of money that's easily affordable for quite a few people, right, per week, to hold that option for a few years and to do adjustments to the land. And by the time the land's ready to exercise, it's worth more. So if you did need to get a bank loan, you could much more easily get it just on the equity without having to have a big deposit. Yeah.
But most lawyers will tell you not to write things like making adjustments to land and whatnot because of risks and things. So, like, at the end of the day, a lawyer will say, well, this is what I recommend, and it's up to you what you decide to do. And often they will just say, oh, well, if shit hits the fan, don't come running to me. So, they will tell you, don't do this and don't do that, because, again, it's sitting in this vibration of fear of we have to think of the worst case scenario. So, yeah, they will tell you, no, don't do this, don't do that. But you can decide, well, actually, I do want to do this and I do want to do that. And they will either decide to continue to work with you, or maybe you go off and you create your own sort of agreement around that. The other one is vendor finance.
Yeah, vendor finance, good one. Yeah. So did you want to talk into that, or you want me?
Well, vendor finance is basically you just get a loan with the person that's selling the property instead of a bank, and then you buy the property off them. So it might be that you get to move in and maybe next month, but you will have a loan with the current landowner, and you'll pay it back. So sometimes that's an option, that can also work for you. So it might be a little bit kind of seem like a mortgage or whatever, but that way you're not really in debt with a bank. You might be more in debt with a particular person. So that's also another option. Again, to get to that point, that's using your interpersonal skills, your communication skills with somebody. And it might even be that they actually want to stay living on the property with you, especially if it's an off-grid sort of situation. Maybe they need some kind of income or something, and just finding out what it is that they need and whether that's something that's going to work for the two of you. So, that's
Yeah, exactly. Vendor finance will only work if they don't need the full price, to buy a new home or something like that. It'll work if you find out, as Melissa said, with those personal skills, what actually is their situation. If they're just behind on their rates and they still want to live on the property, vendor finance could work great. Okay, I think we'll wrap up that session, and we can take a little more questions. Do you want to take some questions first? Yeah. Does anyone have a question to do with it?
I think my vibrational fear would be that, if you found your tribe and you're all going to live in a beautiful community property and you've been living there for years and you just all get on really well, and then the owner of the property dies, and then the kids come in and go, sorry, you've got to go now. But
Yeah, that's what I would like. Yeah, protecting yourself against something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know,
The
the
question.
garden and you work your backside off, and then they're
Yeah.
like, bye.
yeah.
Just repeat the question for people online.
Says it goes to the children and they want to sell it.
Yeah. Okay. The question was if someone say passed away who was the owner of the property or who controlled the property, that's the worry is that suddenly you'd have to leave, or the kids would come in and take over the property, sell it, or ask you to leave once you've built your life there.
So that would obviously depend on the ownership structure. So it, depending on how they own the property, yes, it might be just by what the will says. If they don't have one, well, then there's a whole other law around that. Or the property could be held as something like a trust. So it may not necessarily end at that point. I guess the good thing would be to build a relationship with their extended family as well, if you can. Because when that time comes, then there might be some sort of reciprocity with that ending of that, and what can you do, what's the future here. Maybe they might be more open to allowing you all to stay. Maybe you could put a proposal to them about this is what we want to do with this land, is this something that you want to continue to do. But I guess if that still doesn't work, then that's an opportunity for you guys to go, okay, well, that was the end of that chapter. Now I've got to start a new one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, nothing's ever like...
Nothing's forever.
Because
And
of the creator,
yeah, and
believes
if
that it's going to be needed, and his whole family is going to be involved. So it'll end up being family. It's like,
Yeah.
you're leaving it to family. You are his family.
Yeah. So building that relationship with the landowner's family, if possible, would be a good way to start.
We'd be really interested in going into the cooperative purchase of land, but you said that it's difficult to get a lawyer. Are you a lawyer that could do that?
Well, it's difficult to get one started because it's quite expensive.
speaking of the question.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry, what was your name?
Karen.
Karen said she'd like to get into a cooperative purchase. Is that something you specialise in?
Yeah. And so I don't specialise necessarily in those areas at this point in time. Like, I'm not doing that kind of work myself, but I know that it can be hard to find a lawyer that will be willing to do it from the get-go. But if it's already something that's established, they will only need to provide advice to you because this is already sort of established. But if you want to start it from scratch, it can be quite expensive depending on where you go, because it all depends on the number of people, what sort of entity structure you need, and then there's other agreements that might come from that. And then there's obviously the conveyancing aspect, which is probably the most simple part to it, but sort of anywhere between sort of $15,000 to $40,000 usually in legal fees. Like, you could go visit somewhere in town and they'll do it, but it'd be very expensive. But if you can find a suburban lawyer that does that sort of work on a regular basis, then the fees might be much less. And if there's a number of you, well, you're splitting the costs anyway, so it might be, a couple of grand or $4 or $5 grand each. Yeah. So, yeah, if it already exists, it's going to be easy because it's already there, the agreement's already set up. Someone will happily be able to help you with getting it in. But to start it, you'll need to find someone. And this is a potential area of law that I'm looking at doing in the future, but it's not something that I'm practicing right now.
And feeling into if you're a bit concerned that you might get involved with the community as a collaboration and then might get asked to leave, there's ways to hedge your bets. Like, you would build maybe a tiny house on wheels that you could move to find a new property, because remember, nothing is forever, and I believe moving into the next area that our universe around us is moving into, it's not going to be so much about having ownership of things. It's going to be about, as Melissa said before, being a caretaker of lands and being moved to where we are needed at that time, or we're needing to learn something at that time. But if you did build something more fixed, and worst case you had to leave, you've got that skill, haven't you, to do it again? You know, that's all the things I've lost in that world. I've always, in the past life, of doing things like renovation and that. When I felt like I've lost it, I'm like, I haven't really. I've learnt that skill. I could do it all again much quicker and better. Yeah. So. Yeah,
Is
sorry.
there another question? Did you have a question back there?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. I'm curious, so a lot of the suggestions you're making still kind of, you need some form of base money. Is that kind of the message you're giving, that you still need some sort of base money to get anything going?
No,
I
not
know the topic
necessarily.
is kind of, what do you do when you don't have much money?
Yeah, I think it might have been just before you arrived. I touched on that a lot of our members that I've recently walked on their blocks of land, they have said to me their concern of wanting to build tribes. So straight away, if you've got skills that you can offer, I've been offered. You wouldn't believe one of the blocks of land I walked, and the owner said to me, "Look over here. You could build a community here, Robbie." And she just sees the value I can add with just being involved to help them build what they want to do, because they were passionate about when we were talking about having little festivals there, having a mystery school there where we can teach sort of things. There's many people I know in communities or living on land that don't necessarily even pay any rent. The owner sees the value in having the person there. Yeah.
And I guess there's a whole area of, you can get into things about, how do I get out of paying my rates? And there's a potential whole area with that. How do I squat on land and not have to pay for that? And there's areas that you can obviously look into with that. What comes from that, that's really up to you. I'm not suggesting that you go down those routes, but yeah, you might be able to find some land way, way out in the middle of nowhere and just start living there. Like you could do that, right? Whether that's legal, I cannot say, but there's always options. And like you said, finding people that already own land that need fresh new energy coming in is a probably more safer way to go with that.
Okay, any more questions before we wrap this section up? No, we're all good. Okay, I think we'll... Yeah, we could... who's happy to move on to the next part of it?
We'll have a break.
Or we'll have a quick break and then we'll move on to the next part, so which is going to be about ways to transition obviously out of the 3D. We need money, ways you can earn money whilst living your dream lifestyle, whether it be off-grid or van life. Ways you can build an online business. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take a quick break of maybe
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay.
Right.